What if I told you the moment your heart breaks is the exact moment your true self begins to awaken? That behind every tear, every betrayal, every silent scream in the dark lies a version of you the world has never seen? This is not just a story of pain. It is a journey through it. And what happens at the end will change the way you see your scars forever. The night was silent, too silent. Street lights flickered above the broken pavement. Cold wind cut through the air like blades. He stood there, alone, shoulders trembling, eyes wide. Pain throbbed through his chest, not from a wound, but from something deeper, something that clawed at the soul. A moment ago, everything was fine. A heartbeat ago, the world made sense. Now, everything felt upside down. The sound of tires screeched. A phone slipped from his hand. Glass shattered nearby. But he did not flinch. He could not move, could not speak, only feel. His lungs begged for air. His thoughts raced without control. Faces flashed in his mind. Voices echoed, twisted by fear. A street dog howled in the distance. A siren wailed. But all he could hear was the pounding in his ears. This was not just pain. It was invasion. It was war inside his own chest. He wanted to scream. He wanted to disappear. But he stood still. Because sometimes survival means not running. His knees buckled, but he did not fall. His fists clenched, but he did not fight. Instead, he felt. He allowed the sting. The sharp, bitter sting of truth. He had been betrayed. Not by an enemy, but by someone he trusted. The smile that once warmed him now haunted him like a ghost. He saw shadows dance across the wall, felt the cold crawl up his spine. And yet, he breathed. Not deeply, not steadily, but enough to stay alive. His heart wanted to quit, but his spirit refused. Because this is when it counts. Not when the sun is shining, not when the path is clear, but now, when everything hurts, when every step feels like walking through fire, when hope is not a light, but a whisper that says, keep going. Not because it is easy, not because it feels right, but because stopping would mean surrender, and he was not ready to give up. Not tonight. He wiped his face with a trembling hand, not because the tears stopped, but because he chose to see through them. The road ahead was still dark, still filled with broken promises and jagged memories. But he took a step, one foot forward. The pain came with him. It did not vanish. It did not lighten, but it no longer owned him. He welcomed it, let it sit beside him, because pain, as cruel as it was, also taught him how deep he could go and still rise. Each breath became a rebellion, each heartbeat a victory. Around him, the world continued. Cars passed without slowing. Windows glowed with the lives of strangers. Laughter echoed from some corner he could not see. He felt like a ghost among the living, but that made him fight harder. If the world did not notice his hurt, then he would become so strong that the world would never forget his rise. He remembered a voice, old and cracked, telling him as a child, "You will never know your strength until you are standing knee-deep in hell and still moving forward." That voice echoed now, not as a whisper, but as a roar. He walked, shoes scuffing against the uneven ground, hands curled at his sides, not in anger, but in control. There was power in restraint. There was courage in simply standing, in not turning around, in not begging for explanations. That would never bring peace. His scars were fresh, bleeding into his thoughts, but he wore them proudly. They were proof that he had loved, trusted, fallen, and still had the will to walk. The cold crept through the holes in his jacket. His fingers stiffened, but he did not complain. He looked up. The sky was a canvas of black and ash. No stars, no moon, just emptiness. And yet, even in that vast darkness, he imagined light, not because he could see it, but because he chose to believe in it. Belief. That was the turning point. When the hurt does not disappear, but you stop needing it to. He crossed a silent intersection. No cars, no voices, only the sound of his own feet, and the wind wrapping around his neck like a reminder. You are still here. The city was sleeping, but his mind was alive. He thought of the night before, The moment the truth hit, like a thunderclap, like ice to the chest. He had seen the message, the lie, the face of someone who claimed to care, but left a knife behind their smile. His stomach twisted again at the memory. His heart recoiled, but he did not run from it. He watched it replay, and he told himself, "This is not your end." It hurt. Of course it hurt. But pain is not poison. Pain is the process, the cleansing fire, the brutal teacher. And right now, he was a student. Every step forward was a lesson. In patience, in grit, in self-respect. He remembered how he begged, how he pleaded to be understood, to be valued, to be heard. But they did not listen. And now he listened to himself. He repeated a truth that felt too heavy hours ago. I am enough. Not perfect, not unbroken, but enough. He passed a storefront with a cracked mirror in the display. For a moment he saw himself, eyes swollen, face pale, but standing. And that was everything. People think strength looks like shouting, like throwing punches. But sometimes it looks like silence, like walking away, like starting over with nothing, except your own heart in your hands. He gripped that heart, gently, carefully. It had been through hell, but it was still beating. He reached the edge of the block. Beyond it, the road dipped into darkness. No lights, no guide. He stood there, looking into the unknown. His mind whispered doubts, told him to go back, to hide, to let the pain rot him from inside. But he shook his head. Once. Hard. No, he said aloud. The first word he had spoken in hours. And in that one syllable, there was defiance. There was fire. Because he realized something. Something that made his breath catch, and his chest rise higher than before. The hurt was real, but so was his choice. To rise, to heal, to begin again. Not as a victim, but as a survivor. He took one more step into the dark. Not because he was ready, but because he was determined. And sometimes, that is all it takes. Not certainty, not perfection, but a decision. To move, to rise, to believe. And as he vanished into the shadows, the wind behind him quieted. The pain inside him pulsed softer. And a small ember, a flicker, lit within his chest. It was not peace. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something stronger than pain could ever destroy. It was the beginning of something stronger than pain could ever destroy. He kept walking. The silence was no longer empty. It was sacred now. A quiet space between who he was and who he was becoming. Each breath filled him with something new. Not joy, not yet, but resilience. Raw and unshaped. A seed waiting to bloom in cracked soil. The sidewalk turned rough, littered with broken glass and forgotten things. But he did not step around them. He walked through, carefully, deliberately, because the broken things did not scare him anymore. He had become one. And in that brokenness, he had discovered the edges of his strength. A neon sign blinked from a closed diner. Its hum filled the air like a tired heartbeat. He paused there, bathed in its flickering red light, and felt something inside him settle. He had not eaten, had not slept, but the hunger in his body could never match the hunger in his soul. A hunger for meaning, for purpose, for something that made the hurt worth it. He leaned against a rusted pole, felt its chill press into his spine, and stared into the night. Memories tried to crawl back in. Voices that once comforted, now sharp and twisted with betrayal. But he had learned something powerful. He did not need to fight the memories. He only needed to face them, see them, and then keep walking anyway. The city felt like a maze. Every turn looked familiar, but wrong. Like déjà vu dipped in dread. But his steps did not falter. He had no map, but he trusted the direction of his will. And that was enough. Pain had once dragged him to the floor. Now it followed behind him, like a shadow, present, but no longer in control. His hands were still shaking, but the trembling no longer meant weakness. It meant life. It meant feeling. And feeling meant he was healing, even if it hurt, especially if it hurt. A street lamp above him buzzed to life. He looked up. It flickered uncertainly, then held, and in that light, he saw his breath rise into the cold air. Proof that he was still here, still alive, still choosing to go on. He stepped into the glow. Let it wash over him like rain. It did not warm him, but it lit the road. And sometimes, that is all the universe gives. Not answers, not comfort, just a single light, to remind you the path continues. He looked at his hands, palms red from clenching, knuckles scraped from earlier. But those hands, they had held, they had reached, they had fought, and they would build again. Not the same life, not the same dream, but something new, something wiser, something earned through fire. He began to speak quietly, to himself, not madness, but meditation. Words spilled out like prayers. I am not my past. I am not their choices. I am not the lies they told. I am still here. I am still here. His voice cracked on the last word, but he kept going. That is what courage looks like. Not loud, not perfect, just relentless. He passed a playground, swings creaking in the wind. He remembered laughter. He remembered a younger version of himself, one who dreamed big, who trusted easily, who never imagined betrayal could come wearing a familiar face. He nodded to that younger self, not in shame, but in respect, because even back then, even in innocence, he had been brave. And now, he was becoming something even greater. He crossed a bridge, steel cold beneath his feet. Below him, the river churned, black and furious. He stopped at the center, looked down into the water. There was a part of him that wanted to throw every memory into that current, to let the hurt sink beneath the surface and vanish. But pain does not vanish. It transforms. If you let it, if you carry it with care, not as a burden, but as a lesson. So instead of letting go, he held on, not to the sorrow, but to the strength born from it. He stood there for a moment longer, the wind howling around him like a storm's ghost. Then he walked off the bridge and into a street lined with closed doors. Each one reminded him that some chapters are meant to end, not because he was unworthy, but because he outgrew them. And growth hurts, like bones stretching under skin, like light forcing its way through cracks. But he was growing, not in silence, not without scars, but with intention, with fight. A stray cat darted across the road. It paused under a streetlight, glanced back, then vanished into the dark. He smiled, because even that cat, feral, free, afraid, was still moving forward. He felt his spine straighten, his pace quicken, not to escape the past, but to meet the future halfway. He did not know what waited ahead. Maybe more hurt, maybe another fall, but maybe something better, something that would make sense of this night, of this pain. And even if not, even if the hurt lingered forever, he would walk with it like an old friend, one that reminded him of everything he had survived. The city began to shift. Dawn tugged at the edges of the sky. A faint glow pushed against the night. He kept walking, heart heavy, feet sore, but soul alive. And that was the beginning of everything he never knew. He had the strength to become. And that was the beginning of everything he never knew. He had the strength to become. The horizon began to breathe. A faint blush of gold pierced the charcoal sky. It did not flood the world with light, not yet, but it hinted, promised, and he welcomed it, not with open arms, but with a silent nod, a quiet agreement between a soul and the sky. Yes, he was still here. The buildings around him, once shadows, began to show their shape. Brick, metal, cracks and rust. The city wore its damage like armor. And now, so did he. He walked past a bakery just opening. The scent of warm bread slipped through a half-cracked door. It filled his lungs like a lullaby. Soft, real, a reminder that the world, despite the cruelty it sometimes offered, still had moments of kindness, hidden in corners, where no one looked. A woman behind the counter caught his eye. She smiled, tired but genuine. He did not smile back. Not fully. But something shifted in his face. His shoulders eased. His jaw unclenched. He nodded once and walked on, because the journey was not over. Not even close. He had miles to go, wounds to heal, a self to rebuild. But for the first time in what felt like forever, he knew he would make it. Not because someone would save him, not because the pain had passed, but because he had learned to carry it with honor, to let it carve strength into his bones. He passed by a schoolyard fence. Colorful drawings fluttered in the early wind, childlike scribbles, stick figures holding hands, bright suns and blue skies, words like love and hope in crooked letters. He stopped, stared, felt the ache rise again, not of pain, but of memory. He had once drawn like that, before the world taught him to fear, before love came with conditions, before hope felt dangerous. But maybe, just maybe, he could learn again, not to forget, not to pretend, but to feel joy, alongside the hurt, to trust the sun, even when clouds were overhead. A car rolled by. A song played through its open window, low, steady, a voice singing about rising after the fall. He did not know the words, but he understood the message, because that was him now. Not a victim, not a broken thing, but a soul mid-transformation, a warrior without armor, a phoenix still covered in ash. And still, he moved forward. The sun broke fully now, spilling gold down alleyways and rooftops. It struck his face, warmed his skin, brought color back into a world that had been painted in grief. He stopped at a crosswalk, waited for the light to change, watched the city stir. People emerged from buildings, coffee in hand, eyes bleary with sleep. They had no idea that someone beside them was fighting a silent war. But that did not matter. He knew, and that was enough. The light changed. He stepped into the street, each footfall steadier than the last, each breath deeper, fuller, more his. A child holding her mother's hand glanced up at him as he passed. She smiled, a tooth missing, eyes bright, hope untouched. He smiled back, this time fully, not because the pain was gone, but because joy had found a place beside it. The two could coexist. They always had. He had just not known how to hold them both. Until now. He turned onto a new street, one he had never walked before. It was quieter, narrow, but bathed in morning light. Birds called from unseen branches. The air tasted clean, like possibility. And for the first time in a long time, he realized something simple, something profound. The hurt had not ended his story. It had opened it, cracked the old chapters wide, so new ones could rise from the raw earth beneath. This was not recovery. This was rebirth. Not gentle, not easy, but sacred, real. He passed a mirror in a storefront window, paused, looked at himself, not with judgment, not with pity, but with understanding, with pride. That face, lined, tired, changed, belonged to a man who had refused to stay down, a man who had faced the storm and chosen to stand anyway. He raised one hand, touched the glass, a silent promise to the reflection. We begin again. Not perfect, not healed, but with eyes open, heart open, and fire still burning. He walked on, not with the weight of the past dragging behind him, but with the lessons of it pressed into his skin, like armor made from scars. The morning grew louder. Life rushed in. Buses, laughter, the smell of coffee and concrete. But inside him, stillness, strength, purpose. The hurt had changed him, and that was the point. Growth does not come in comfort. It comes in collapse, in heartbreak, in silence, when the world does not clap for you. But you rise anyway. And as he walked into the sunlit street, into a world that no longer felt like a stranger, he knew without doubt he had not survived the pain to remain the same. He had survived to become something more. He had survived to become something more. He kept walking, not as a man who was merely existing, but as someone who had been remade, stripped of illusions, stripped of dependency, rebuilt, brick by bloody brick, by the lessons pain had hammered into his soul. Every scar was a sentence in his story, every tear, punctuation. And now, he was the one holding the pen. The city moved around him with growing speed. The air buzzed with life. Shutters opened. Vendors dragged carts onto sidewalks. Taxi horns shouted into the sky. But his pace did not falter. It found rhythm, not in the chaos around him, but in the calm inside him. He had found something in the night. Not a finish line, not a cure, but a core. Solid, unshakable. Himself, the version that had been buried beneath apologies, compromises, fears dressed as logic, love twisted into chains. Now that self stood tall, quiet, rooted. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the name, a familiar one, a face that once made his pulse race. Now it only made his soul go still. He let it ring, let it fall silent, because some doors, once shut, do not need to be reopened. The past had teeth, but he no longer fed it. He crossed a park filled with morning joggers. Their shoes slapped the ground in steady beats. He watched them move, their lungs pumping, their faces set with focus. He realized something then. They were running toward something, not away. And so was he. For too long he had run from loneliness, from rejection, from the sound of his own thoughts in a quiet room. But not anymore. Now he moved toward himself, toward peace, toward a life not filtered through someone else's vision. A bench caught his eye. Worn wood, a small crack down one side. He sat, felt the weight of his body settle, felt the ache in his legs, a sweet reminder that he had walked through the night. Above him, the trees whispered, leaves rustled like applause, not from a crowd, but from nature itself, acknowledging his journey, blessing it. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and for the first time in days, he did not see images of betrayal. He did not hear the echo of shouted words, or the slam of a door that would never open again. He saw light, not from the sun, but from within, a flicker that had survived storms, and now burned steady. It was not joy, not yet, but it was readiness. Readiness to feel again, to love again. First himself. He placed a hand on his chest, felt his heartbeat, firm, undeniable. He smiled softly. A small victory, but a real one, because there was a time, not long ago, when he had questioned if it would beat at all, when the weight of heartbreak had squeezed his ribs and hollowed his breath. But now it beat like a war drum, not of aggression, but of survival, of rebirth. He stood from the bench, looked around. The world seemed sharper, more colorful. The reds were redder, the air sweeter. Even the pain, still humming inside, felt cleaner, no longer tangled in confusion, but understood. He began walking again, toward nothing specific, and yet everything, because forward was enough. Forward was progress. Every step a line in his comeback story, every breath a rebellion against the silence that once swallowed him. He passed a bookstore with a help wanted sign. He paused, looked through the window. Stacks of stories, lives told in pages. Something stirred in him. A whisper. You have something to say too. He turned, kept walking, not because he was unsure, but because he knew the right moment would come. And when it did, he would be ready. Because now, he had voice. He had volume. He had vision. The pain had not ended his ability to dream. It had refined it, stripped the fantasy, left behind something real, something earned. He thought back to the moment he broke, the exact second his knees hit the floor, and his chest caved in, like the world had pressed its boot down, and waited for him to vanish. And yet, he had not. He remembered the silence that followed, thick, unbearable. But now he saw it differently. It was not emptiness. It was space. Space to rebuild, to breathe, to ask, what now? And now he had an answer. Keep going, even if the road is uneven, even if the sun disappears again, even if some days feel like echoes of sorrow. Keep going, because healing is not a moment. It is a journey, a series of decisions to rise, to speak, to choose light even when the dark feels familiar. And as he turned a corner onto a quiet street, where birds sang without knowing if anyone listened, where flowers bloomed in cracked concrete, he knew this truth. He would never again beg for belonging, never again shrink himself to fit a love that required silence over truth. He would not wait for validation. He would be it. He was no longer defined by who hurt him, but by how he rose. How he walked on. How he chose love after knowing loss. How he chose courage after being shattered. He looked to the sky, now painted in soft hues of blue and amber. Not just another morning, but his morning, the first of many, the proof of his survival, the reward for choosing to live. When everything inside him said surrender, and with each step forward, he carried not the weight of his past, but the power of it, not the pain itself, but what the pain had taught: strength, clarity, freedom. And as the city opened before him, he did not look back. He did not wait for permission. He simply moved forward, because when it hurts, and you keep walking anyway, you do not just survive. You become. You become the fire, born in your own ashes. You become the wind that no longer waits to be carried. You become the voice that no longer trembles to be heard. He walked through streets that once reminded him of loss. Now they hummed with quiet power. Each crack in the pavement felt less like a trap and more like a reminder. Even broken paths lead forward. He passed a mural painted along the side of a faded brick wall. A woman with wings, eyes closed, hands outstretched, as if surrendering to the sky. Underneath were 3 simple words: rise, begin, again, asterisk, asterisk. He stood there, staring at it, feeling something old shift within him. Not pain, not grief, but purpose. There was a time he would have walked past, not seeing, not feeling, too buried in the weight of why me. But now he asked, why not me? Why not rise from this? Why not make this pain mean something? And in that moment, he made a silent vow to never let suffering be the end of his story, to let it shape the next chapter, but never dictate it. He pressed his palm to the mural, just for a second, then let go, not of the memory, but of the bitterness, because bitterness is a cage. Forgiveness, even of yourself, is the key. He crossed into an older part of the city, where buildings leaned like tired elders, but still stood, still held space for life to happen. A boy sat on a stoop, tying his shoelaces in slow loops, his mother nearby, speaking softly into her phone, worry etched across her forehead. The man paused, not out of fear, but out of recognition. That was how struggle looked. Every day. Unnoticed. Human. But now he saw it. He felt it. Because pain had taught him how to see. Not just with his eyes, but with his spirit. And that was a gift. Not one he had wanted, but one he had earned. The boy looked up, met his gaze, and without thinking, the man smiled. Not out of politeness, but from the deep place where empathy lives. The boy smiled back, and in that small exchange, a spark passed. Because healing, real healing, ripples. He kept walking, longer strides now, his body loosening, the stiffness of grief finally fading into something softer, something manageable. Ahead, a bridge arched over a slow-moving river. The water below was dark, but it shimmered in the light. He stepped onto it, felt the wooden planks groan beneath his feet. He leaned over the railing, watched his reflection ripple, distorted, but there, alive. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small stone, one he had picked up the night it all broke apart. He had carried it since, like a talisman, a weight, a reminder. He looked at it, so small, so insignificant, and yet it had carried a piece of his sorrow. Now it was time to let it go. He held it one last time, whispered nothing, because no words were needed, then dropped it, watched it fall, disappear beneath the surface. Not erased, but released. The river took it, just as time had taken the sharpest edges of his pain. Not to forget, but to forgive. He stayed there for a while, breathing, feeling the wind lift strands of his hair, hearing the world move, without needing to chase it. For once, stillness did not feel like failure. It felt like power. Then he walked again, not out of urgency, but because life was waiting. The day stretched wide before him. Not perfect, not promised, but full. He passed a music shop, where a soft piano melody drifted out the door, each note like a memory, a touch, a goodbye. He paused, let it wash over him, did not run from the sting, did not flinch, because this was what growth looked like. Not the absence of pain, but the refusal to run from it. He reached into his coat, pulled out a notebook, the one he had stopped writing in months ago. He opened it. The blank pages still waited, still welcomed him back, like an old friend who never asked where you had been. He sat on a bench just outside the shop, pulled a pen from his pocket, pressed it to the paper, and wrote, "When it hurts, keep moving, not away from it, but through it, because on the other side of pain is the person you were always meant to become, and they're waiting for you. So rise, begin, again, asterisk, asterisk." The words poured from him like breath, like blood, like truth that had waited far too long in the dark. He wrote until his hand cramped, until his eyes blurred, until he felt lighter than he had in months. Not because the hurt was gone, but because it no longer owned him. He closed the notebook, held it to his chest, felt his heart beat against it, strong, steady, alive. And then he stood, faced the street, faced the future, faced himself, and took the next step, and the next, and the next. Because when it hurts, and you keep going, you do not just survive, you awaken. And so, he walks on, not as a man defined by what broke him, but by what he built from the broken pieces, not with the same steps as before, but with footsteps grounded in wisdom, in fire-tested faith, in quiet strength, because pain had knocked him down, but it had also taught him how to rise, how to stand taller than ever before. He no longer fears the darkness. He has lived in it, sat with it, breathed it in, and come out the other side. Now, when it hurts, he listens, he learns, he leans into the lesson, and lets it shape him, not shatter him. He knows now. The wound is where the light enters. The fall is where the flight begins. The hurt is not the end. It is the beginning of becoming. And if you, too, are hurting, if you are standing in the middle of the storm, shaking, breaking, barely breathing, remember this. You are not alone. You are not weak. You are not finished. You are being forged, refined, transformed. So take the pain. Feel it. Honor it. Then rise. Begin. Again. Because when it hurts, that is when it matters most. That is when you find out what you are truly made of. And what you are made of is enough. More than enough. So keep walking. Keep healing. Keep becoming. Your story is not over. It is just beginning.